discussed it other than I tell him what's in the news about it.
And what's his reaction? What does he say?
Go tell him that I need a pardon. Go tell him I deserve a pardon. That's what he said.
That's Diddy's lead defense attorney giving the exclusive to CBS Mornings. And get this, while Diddy faces a possible 20-year sentence, is he still planning a music comeback?
He said, well, he's going to be back in Madison Square Garden.
Doing what?
I guess being on stage, you know? I mean, and I said, I'll be.
The courtroom was silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. Every seat was taken, every eye fixed on the judge, and every ear waiting for a voice that could change everything. There was no whispering, no small talk, only a heavy stillness that seemed to press down on the air. This wasn't just another day in court.
Whole criminal trial, 7 weeks of testimony and a verdict that ended in Sean Diddy Combs' conviction on 2 federal sex crimes charges. Could he be pardoned by the President of the United States? You know, that is a question that came up a lot when we were doing the live streams of the Diddy trial every day on YouTube. I never really considered it as a real possibility, but I'll tell you what, now, based on current reporting, we may have to take this seriously. Oh, and in terms of relief for Diddy, we also have to get into his defense team's new memo that they filed arguing that his conviction should be thrown out, or at the very least, he should get a new trial. We're going to talk about that too. And by the way, let me tell you, we have an amazing guest who I'm going to be bringing on in a little bit, somebody who actually helped secure federal pardons for his clients, including from President Trump, and is an expert in criminal law, has been following this case from the very beginning. I'm going to bring him on in a little bit. But why do I say that we have to take pardons seriously now? Why? Well, TMZ has reported that President Donald Trump's administration has been talking to Diddy's legal team about a potential pardon, a forgiveness for a federal crime. It's enshrined in the Constitution. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1, the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And according to TMZ, his decision to pardon Diddy may be determined based on if Judge Arun Subramanian grants Diddy bail, which, by the way, we dedicated a whole sidebar to the other day. His team just filed a brand new letter with the court asking for him to be released. I broke it down, discussed all those arguments. But TMZ also has reported that the pardon decision could also come down to how Diddy is ultimately sentenced on October 3rd. And remember, he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, but he was found guilty of the 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations, namely transporting his exes, Jane and Cassie Ventura Fine, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. Each charge carries up to 10 years in prison, although I'll tell you in a prior filing, the government was looking at roughly 4 to 5 year prison sentence. Mind you, this is before a pre-sentencing report has been prepared for the court, which does a full background check and analysis of Diddy's life and crimes. Now, the defense would definitely love time served and he gets out, or 21 to 27 months. And remember, at the time of sentencing, he'll have been locked up for a full year, so he'll get credit for that. And the judge has discretion here because there's no mandatory minimum when it comes to these charges. But anyway, as you know, we have been following this Diddy story since it broke, 2 years ago? Pardon. Okay, really a pardon. Meaning Diddy, let's say he gets 5 years in prison, Trump pardons him, he's free to go? President Trump was asked about this a few months ago before the verdict. This was back in May. And he said when asked about a pardon for Diddy, I would certainly look at the facts. If I think somebody was mistreated, whether they like me or don't like me, it wouldn't have any impact on me. He used to really like me a lot, but I think when I ran for politics, that relationship busted up from what I read. I don't know, he didn't tell me that, but I'd read some little bit nasty statements in the paper all of a sudden. And Diddy had been photographed with Trump over the years. There was some sort of relationship there. President Trump even called him a good friend on a 2012 episode of his TV show The Apprentice. The problem is, some comments Diddy made about Trump in recent years as Diddy really entered the political realm. There was a video where he's speaking to radio host Charlemagne saying, if Trump gets elected, I really do believe in my heart there'll be a race war. In another video on Revolt, he says white men like Trump need to be banished. And by the way, you know who's not letting anyone forget this? Combs' rival 50 Cent. Took to social media recently, wrote, see, Trump don't like S like this, buddy, you run your mouth too much. And Donald doesn't take well to disrespect and doesn't forget who chooses to go against him. While working tirelessly to make America great again, there is no room for distraction. He would consider pardoning anyone who was being mistreated, not Puff Daddy.
It was the day everything would end, one way or another. The only movement came from the flashing cameras in the back. Then the judge spoke, and the silence shattered. When the sentence was announced, it wasn't just a number, it was a shockwave. Diddy sat there, and you could see the exact moment it hit him. This wasn't what he had prepared for. This wasn't the carefully calculated outcome his lawyers had hinted at. It was a curveball so sharp and unexpected that, for a moment, the man who had built an empire on being untouchable looked completely stunned. 4 weeks, maybe even months, the trial had played out like a high-profile drama. Every day, reporters crowded outside the courthouse. Every night, headlines dissected even the smallest developments. Some believed Diddy's fame and fortune would work in his favor, tipping the scales. Others argued that the sheer weight of the accusations would crush him. No matter how high he had built his walls, almost no one predicted the sentence that came down that day. It wasn't lenient. It wasn't balanced. It was brutal. And the judge didn't need to raise his voice.
Let me tell you, the idea of Trump pardoning Diddy is not getting a ton of love out there. Conservative commentator Megyn Kelly posted on X, Trump should not pardon Diddy. He doesn't deserve it. He's a Trump hater. He's a woman abuser. MAGA is already upset over elites seeming to cover for each other. This would not help. GOP struggling with young female voters, most of whom will hate a Diddy pardon. And then you just had other random accounts like America First. What? He's actually considering this? Diddy is a depraved, abusive, sexual deviant who should be spending the rest of his life in prison. If Trump pardons him, he will get absolutely crushed. Who is advising him lately? It's looking like straight up sabotage at this point. There were other accounts that were not in favor of it, although there was this account. Milo posted on X, Trump has no choice but to pardon Diddy after the government, led by James Comey's daughter Maureen, simply lost interest in Diddy's guilt the moment they secured his tapes incriminating powerful Democrats. The prosecution was a shambles. The trial was a farce. Now, I want to talk about if this is really going to happen, how it would happen. Also, if it really depends on bail and sentencing, then what are we talking about? And I have somebody who not only has been following the Diddy case from the very beginning, not only is a renowned criminal defense attorney, but actually has obtained federal pardons from the president, including from Donald Trump. By the way, for his clients Kodak Black and Lil Wayne, those were maybe the most notable. I'm joined by Bradford Cohen. Bradford, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Now, before I even get into the pardon, okay, there's a bit of breaking news before we were going to come on. This is what I want to get your opinion on first. So Combs' defense team filed a memo in support of a motion for judgment of acquittal, or in the alternative, a motion for a new trial. And basically, I know you read through it, but basically the evidence, they would say, is insufficient to sustain that conviction. Their main arguments is really echoing what we've talked about a little bit when it came to the bail analysis, but that his prosecution, his conviction on these Mann Act prostitution charges is so unique. He wasn't profiting off of this business. All consenting adults were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking. They argued this isn't even prostitution per se, it's voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but he paid them for their time. Everybody was having a good time. He makes a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were typically videotaped so they could watch them later on. It's just amateur pornography. And then finally makes the argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, and would have never came in if he was merely being prosecuted for prostitution, particularly the Intercontinental Hotel footage of him purporting to beat up Cassie Ventura Fine. And he says, at the very least, he needs a new trial. I hand it over to you. You think this is a successful argument?
Thank you. I don't know if it's going to be successful in the judgment of acquittal. I think the argument is interesting because everyone agrees he might be the only person in custody right now that has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. The Mann Act, and it gives a nice history of the Mann Act, and a lot of people don't understand what the Mann Act is, but the Mann Act was enacted because of a racist motivation that white women were being recruited by people of color to go across state lines and make money. So actually pimping those women across state lines and making money off of their sexual exploits. Obviously, that's not the case here. It's used so infrequently, it might have been a handful of people who were actually charged with the Mann Act. No one in custody currently has ever been convicted of the Mann Act. So it's an interesting argument to say, hey, listen, this Mann Act, the original reason for it was racist. The original way that it was applied was racist. The way it's applied here is incorrect because he was not making any money from quote unquote pimping or getting these women across, or men getting.
He didn't put on a show for the cameras. He simply read the reasoning point by point, The evidence, the testimony, the patterns of behavior that showed someone who had crossed the line again and again, confident there would be no real consequences. With each word, the weight in the room grew heavier. This wasn't about celebrity anymore. It was about accountability. Diddy's body language told its own story. At the start of the trial, he carried himself with the same aura he'd had for decades. Chin up, eyes sharp, looking like he knew something the rest of the world didn't. But as the sentencing went on, that confidence started to fade. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward his lawyers, then back to the judge. For a moment, it seemed like he might speak, but he didn't. When the number finally came, it was more than just a sentence. It was a statement. The judge might as well have said, "Your empire stops here." It wasn't the kind of sentence that could be spun into a redemption story in a few years. It wasn't something a slick PR campaign could soften.
Now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations. That's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show two conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where a person and his girlfriend arranged for adult men to have consensual sexual relations with the adult long-term girlfriend as part of a demonstrated swingers lifestyle and has been prosecuted and incarcerated under the Mann Act. Combs and two of his longtime girlfriends had a private, intimate life that is not uncommon today. They're talking about Jane and Cassie Ventura. Quote, it may not have been common on June 25th, 1910, when the Mann Act, or as it was originally called, the White Slave Traffic Act, was passed, but attitudes about sex and morality have come a long way in the last 115 years. It is worth noting that when the Mann Act was passed to protect the morals and decency of America's women were not allowed to vote. As noted below, perhaps due to the troubling background of this statute, whose history is rich with both racism and misogyny, the Department of Justice has limited its application to those people profiting financially from the business of prostitution and not using it to prosecute consensual adults for their own lifestyles. By the way, we covered this on a previous sidebar. The defense made an argument months ago to have these charges thrown out, called it basically racially motivated.
This was the kind of number that could change the course of a life. The reaction in the courtroom was instant and unfiltered. You could hear muffled gasps, and a few people shifted in their seats as if they could feel the weight of it themselves. Even those who had expected Diddy to face punishment seemed caught off guard. This wasn't just harsh, it was symbolic. It felt like a warning to the entire industry. No matter how high you climb, no matter how much you own, the rules can still reach you. In a single moment, the myth began to crumble. The myth of the mogul who could control any room, outmaneuver any opponent, and walk away from any scandal. For decades, Diddy had mastered the art of shaping narratives, whether through music, business, or sheer force of personality. But here, in this courtroom, that power meant nothing. The narrative was no longer his to control, and that's what made the moment so shocking. The courtroom isn't a stage. It's not an arena where applause or influence matter. Here, the judge made it crystal clear, the only thing that matters is the weight of the facts.
The dynamic in a way that could be risky for us.
Was Christina Quorum ever potentially going to be called by the defense? We were all shocked why the government never chose to call her, since, I don't know, her name came up almost every single day through almost every witness. Was there a plan by the defense to call her?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into specific plans or non-plans, but it was more of an overall decision just not to put anyone on and just to use a few pieces of evidence that hadn't come in.
What do you think about the prosecution's choice not to call her? Because I will tell you, we did lunchtime shows, live shows with our audience. I would say 80% of the questions that we got during 7 weeks of testimony was, why is she not being called and will she be called? Were you surprised the prosecution chose not to call who was supposed to be the main alleged co-conspirator?
I mean, I don't think so. I think that she would have been a double-edged sword for them, and they probably didn't want to take the risk. As you saw during the trial, even a number of the witnesses that they had always planned to call that they did put in kind of blew up in their faces or had positive things to say about Sean that maybe they weren't anticipating. And so it would have been pretty risky for them to put Christina Quorum on the stand, I think.
There was so much being said about your client in that trial, obviously in the media, facing a number of different lawsuits. We also wondered whether or not he, and it's his decision alone, whether he wanted to take the stand and give his story, tell his story, give his version of events. Obviously, there are a ton of risks that come with putting a defendant on the stand, but it would be his choice. Was there a conversation about that?
Well, I mean, I can't get into, attorney-client privilege conversations. Obviously he thought about it, decided not to. And, as I indicated earlier, we thought the case had gone in really well for us. And so we didn't want to, we liked where we were. So that was basically the decision.
Now, the big news, some of the big news, a lot of big news came out after the trial, was the firing of Maureen Comey, the lead prosecutor in this case. Now, there's obviously a political angle to it. There are comments that she has made. But I have to ask, you going head to head against her for so many weeks, months and before that, the firing of her, what did you make of that?
I mean, I think it was unfortunate. She's a very well-respected prosecutor. We had good sort of professional relationships with her during the course of the trial. And, I don't really think it had anything to do with the trial, but I can't really say anything beyond that. It just,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's talk about something we can get into quite a bit. Let's talk bail. Okay, so we did a previous sidebar breaking down the defense's renewed motion for release, several arguments for why Sean Combs should be released on bail pending sentencing, acquitted of the most serious charges. There's no comparable case of someone who is convicted of the Mann Act alone and not engaging in sex trafficking or a prostitution for financial gain, and they would be locked up like this. Talked about the issues plaguing the MDC, how it is dangerous, how he's not a risk of flight, not a danger to the community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion? Because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted.
And just like that, the walls around Diddy's empire cracked wide open. The man who once moved the culture now sat powerless, staring at a future he never saw coming. This wasn't just a sentence, it was a reckoning. Stay tuned, because what happens next could shake the industry to its core.